Supreme Dark Lord Vox Day. Hello, how are you doing?
Good. How are you, Pierre?
So we're in maybe a future office here?
Actually, this is the very office where the great Swiss nationalist writer Gonzague de Reynold did all of his writing.
Yes.
The Tragedy of Europe, his many books on Switzerland and Europe, all written right here in this office.
It's quite beautiful, beautiful custom. What the fuck just happened in Russia?
It's so remarkable on one hand, and yet from a historical perspective, so unsurprising and normal. You know, we don't tend to think in terms of mercenary armies and that sort of thing, mercenary companies in the day of mass civilian armies. And so if you look at the history of mercenary companies, it is absolutely unsurprising that a mercenary company would switch sides when offered a higher bid. Now, we don't know that that's what happened with the Wagner Company, but in light of the fact that the neocons behind Clown World are obviously getting very desperate in the aftermath of the failed Ukrainian counteroffensive, and the fact that $6 billion suddenly went missing, one tends to suspect that there's some sort of relationship between the two things.
Usually it's 6 million who go missing.
Yeah, 6 billion. That's not an accounting error.
Yeah.
It's not a rounding error, and there's a lot of supposition. There's a lot of theories. The one that I favored, and I put this on the blog before it was announced that the coup attempt had failed. The theory that I favored was that the every single time theory, which is that the fact that I can't pronounce his name.
Prigozhin?
Yeah, Prigozhin.
Whatever.
The fact that Prigozhin happens to be Jewish and possibly might have ties to some of the neo-clowns like Nuland and the people running the Kiev regime. And there were even some reported contacts between U.S. neocons and this marketing officer. I suspected that had something to do with it. And that was before we found out about the missing $6 billion. And so it might not actually have anything whatsoever to do with any co-ethnic sympathies. It might just be pure and simple mercenary greed. But either way, it obviously failed for any of a number of reasons. People have postulated maybe it was some sort of arrangement between Putin and Prigozhin. More likely, I think that he didn't have as much control over his company as he thought. And we're not talking about John Hawkins and the White Company here. Mm-hmm. We're looking at a situation where you've got 27,000 Russian convicts, and they might be convicts and they might be mercenaries, but they are still first and foremost Russians, and which is why I just find the whole thing. That's why it's such an insane thing to do. It's such a high risk, low probability of success action to take that I tend to favor the idea that Prigozhin is a sleeper agent of Clown World.
Mm-hmm. There's also the psychological aspect where these kind of oligarchs are like spoiled kids. They're used to get everything they want, and maybe there might be a factor where indeed you wouldn't want to supply such a company, such mercenary company, with all the ammo and all the weapons they request, and therefore he would complain, and therefore he might have an additional incentive to pick a fight. Temper.
I think it was maybe I think it was maybe Black Mountain, who was, I'm getting the name wrong.
BlackRock.
No, not BlackRock. It was the guy who does like some analysis of the Russian situation, and he's pretty good. Now, one thing that he specifically mentioned was the fact that, of course, Wagner was not being given the best ammo and all the best equipment and the best artillery, because Russia is using non-regular troops as its cannon fodder against the Kiev regime. Russia is and has been from the very beginning of the special military operation, has been reserving most of its regulars, most of its best equipment, most of its air in order to be ready to fight NATO directly. I mean, it would be wildly irresponsible if they were to throw their very best troops and gear and everything. Contrary to practically every military doctrine I've ever heard, you always keep your best troops in reserve. I mean, this has been, Napoleon did back with the Old Guard. Waterloo didn't end until the Old Guard had tried and failed at the very end. Even the Spartans customarily would reserve their Spartiates, the Spartan elite, for the most important conclusive part of the battle. We haven't reached that point with regards to the Russo-NATO war, the NATO-Russian war. I mean, it's very clear now. I mean, we talked about this, nearly a year ago. It's very clear that the war isn't primarily between Ukraine and Russia. It's not even primarily between the Kiev regime and Russia. It's primarily between Russia and Clown World, and NATO is the military wing of Clown World. And so that's the real war. And, of course, because it's a much broader war, it's a mistake to even try to analyze the Russian military capabilities without factoring in their allies. Russia could bring in, there's already rumors that Russia has at least one company of veteran Syrian troops in action. If Russia wanted to, they could bring in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, they could bring in any number of Chinese units, they could even bring in a significant amount of North Korean manpower. Mm-hmm. And those are things that, if you're going to talk about US F-16s and that sort of thing, then you have to also be talking about the Revolutionary Guard units and the Chinese capabilities. Now, obviously the Russians are not even using their regulars much yet, so they're not about to draw upon those resources. But if you're analyzing the overall spectrum of, or the overall possibilities of the conflict in its totality, you need to keep those things in mind. BRICS matters just as much as NATO does. And yet, in the mainstream analysis, you never hear any discussion of this.
Now, the diplomatic repercussion of what has happened, you think they will hurt the incredible progress that Russian and Chinese diplomacy has achieved in uniting is not maybe the right word, but certainly into coalescing to a very friendly attitude most of the world except the countries submitted and occupied by NATO or the United States.
I don't think that this little sideshow with Wagner is going to have any impact on anything. The only possible impact that I think it could have is that it is becoming more and more clear to the rest of the world how desperate the NATO Western Clown World, whatever you want to call them, how desperate that collective entity is. It's the counteroffensive failed. The attempt to get the mercenaries to change sides failed. I mean, what is left? F-16, are they really going to bring in F-16s with the idea that a 50-year-old fighter jet platform is some sort of Wunderwaffen that's going to change the course of the war. That's insane. It's like, it would be like saying, well, Germany's invaded France, but we're going to turn the tide of the battle by bringing in Sopwith camels.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the F-16 is an outdated platform from previous wars.
Yes.
You might as well be bringing in biplanes that you're dropping balloon bombs
Mustangs
from
and
World War
Spitfires
II.
from air shows.
Yeah, I mean, why not bring in the Spitfires while you're at it?
Yeah, it's
We're gonna unleash the tornadoes.
yeah, it is weird that which having all these units, these Leopard 1s, old version of the Leopard 2s, and these obsolete equipment such as the Bradleys, fighting vehicles and so on, all that, which got massacred on this offensive. Obviously, you don't attack without air cover or on fortified positions. Anyway, is it a way to deplete the inventories on the cheap? Is it a way to, because they have better equipment, of course, so it's not a sign of desperation, it's something else. What do you think?
I think it's fear. As long as the weaponry that is being destroyed are second-rate, third-rate, outdated equipment, as long as the troops that are being killed are Ukrainian, Polish, whatever, NATO and the United States, the Biden regime, can pretend to the rest of the world that they have more to offer, that they can bring in the genuine U.S. troops, the best U.S. equipment, that sort of thing. But that's not viable because the U.S. Army just isn't big enough anymore. The U.S. weaponry is very, very expensive, not very well tested, and frankly, totally unsuited for peer-to-peer large-scale battle. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting when you look at the way in which the United States and the NATO forces are very, very much in the position of the Axis forces during World War II. They have significant logistical and industrial disadvantages. They can't produce enough ammunition. They can't produce enough weaponry. They don't have enough manpower. Just like, if you do the math, I think that I haven't actually run through the full industrial capacity comparison, but I suspect that the disadvantage currently suffered by the U.S. and the West is pretty comparable to the disadvantage that Germany and Japan had against the industrial power of the U.S. and the rest of the West during World War II. And so when you look, for example, at the way that the Western weapons are supposed to be better because they're higher tech and more technologically advanced, well, most of the German armor in 1942, 1943, most of the German armor was superior. Mm-hmm. The Panther was superior to the Sherman. The Tiger was superior to the T-34 and so forth. The IS-2, well, maybe not the IS-2, but that was later. Anyhow, but it didn't matter because there were 10 Shermans for every Panther. The advantage, the technological advantage, was not enough to overcome the numerical advantage. We're not talking about state-of-the-art British troops against Zulus carrying clubs. We're talking about one very, very effective tank against another slightly more effective tank. Well, whoever's got a 10-to-1 advantage is going to win. There's no question. Yeah. And so, and the other factor, of course, is that for all that the U.S. has bases all over the world, and for all that it has a very, very effective transport system, and still has the leading transport capability in the world.
Yep. But
Russia is a land power. and it's very, very difficult for a sea power to defeat a land power on the land.
Especially when it's allied with another huge land power.
Precisely. And so, I've said for some time now that it is totally impossible for the U.S. to impose its will on Russia or China.
Yeah.
And not because of the nuclear weapons, but because of the just difficulty in transporting the significant amounts of troops and material to the battle zone. And, there's that old saying, he who gets there with the most first wins. Well, Russia's already there.
With everything.
With everything they got.
Now, in the meantime, we have a strange situation in the Western world with high inflation, increased interest rates. The printing press of money keep going like there's no tomorrow. Maybe there's no tomorrow. And the recession being obvious to everyone except the blinds at the Fed and in the governments. Economic crisis usually leads to unrest,
Yes.
which could be a reason for war, to quell the unrest with extraordinary powers. But then doing a war without the support of the people is impossible.
Correct.
How do you solve that equation?
Well, you don't. There is no solution to it. If you look at what has happened, the fundamental problem is that you can't even run the printing presses because we don't actually have a fiat system. It's not a paper system. It's a credit system. The vast majority of the money in the money supply is not paper money that's printed. It's debt. It's credit. Mm-hmm. And it's what in economics is described as the pushing on a string problem. You can't print more borrowers. Now, one attempt to try to print more borrowers is, of course, the importation of all the migrants. And so you've got this massive invasion of the United States, a very large invasion of Europe. But the problem is that not all borrowers are created equally. And the prospects for a unskilled, unemployed Syrian immigrant to borrow enough money to make up for a productive upper middle class white American, the math does not add up.
And we remind that in this context, Syria is a country that goes from Bolivia to Bangladesh.
Exactly. I mean, it doesn't matter. There's a study just came out recently saying that 75% of the post-Merkel, Merkel and post-Merkel migrants are unemployed. So the whole idea of immigrants help the economy is total nonsense.
Of course.
They're a net negative, and they have been for about the past 50 years.
They prop up the real estate prices by occupying the low end of the market.
Well, yes, and they naturally increase the GDP because if nothing else, they're consuming.
But the money they get.
But so what? I mean, it'd be just as easy. In fact, we'd be much better off if instead of all of this money being siphoned off to support unproductive, unemployed foreigners, if they paid the native workers more and then allowed them to spend it on things that would be more beneficial to the economy. I mean, all of the truths that the clown world depends upon are almost uniformly lies. Free trade does not work. The free movement of people does not work. It doesn't matter. I mean, pretty much all of the freedoms that we think about, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, all these sort of things, they're just lies. Mm-hmm. And not only are they lies, but they are dis-civilizational lies. They're lies that actively erode away the foundations that our civilization, our very, very successful civilization, is based upon.
So Vox, I predicted that the system would start to collapse by 2020, and you often said that you would see it by 2030. So we're almost at the middle point. But one thing is for sure, the collapse is definitely happening, and it's already in the process of accelerating. What are the big steps that you see happening right now or soon?
Well, the big step that we've seen already is Brexit. Brexit was the beginning of the end for the European Union, and with France attempting to make nice with BRICS. They haven't actually made an application, but they've made some noise about wanting to join BRICS. I think that's going to be the next big step, is that a major W7 World Economic Forum nation breaking ranks and attempting to move over to the larger part of the global economy. People tend to think about the first world, the developed world, the Western world, but it's not only a smaller economy than the rest of the world in terms of numbers of people. It's now actually smaller in terms of, in economic terms, GDP measured in dollars. And so it's what I call the great bifurcation of the global economy. There's two global economies now, and we don't know yet how much interaction there's going to be between the two. We don't know yet how are you going to be, right now you can't be in Europe or America and have a Russian bank account, right? You can't trade very easily with Russia, and it's going to get harder to trade with China. Mm-hmm. So, what's going to happen when which is going to be the first big Fortune 100 corporation to jump to BRICS? So it's not just a political thing. It's not just about the political entities. It's also about the corporations. And so we've already seen one European Union member state leave the Union. We're going to see more, probably Hungary, probably Italy. And so once that happens, the European Union falls apart. Obviously, the bigger question, and the one that's going to be of interest to a lot of people listening to this, is when does the first sovereign state leave the United States? I've predicted, for I think 19 years now, I've said it's going to happen in 2033. Maybe it'll happen before.
Which day?
July 4th. July 4th.
Good.
It's got to be symbolic, right? Anyhow, but I see no reason whatsoever to think that that's not going to happen. Maybe it'll happen before, maybe it'll happen after, but the dichotomy between, and the division between the various parts of the U.S. population, even those that are descended from people who were in the United States in 1950, and that's that's a smaller and smaller percentage of the population. But even if you just look at the traditional white American population, the gap between the nationalists and, for lack of a better term, we'll call it the Democratic Republican party, is growing. There's so many more and more younger people, especially young married couples, that just don't accept what is the modern media, modern U.S. media narrative norm. And when you see even massively successful companies like Walt Disney hemorrhaging money and cutting 7,000 employees in a single action, you have to wonder how much longer can the center hold? And
Is there even a center?
well, that's the thing. There isn't. There's no center anymore. There's nothing holding the United States together anymore because the United States is no longer American.
Because we see some, there was a book in the 80s called The Seven Nations of North America, or Nine Nations of North America. These have obviously completely changed. Now we have the LGBT Republic of the Potomac, potentially. We have the Soviets, the independent Soviets of California and Oregon and maybe Washington State. We have New Africa in Detroit or some other parts of the country.
And you've got the bronze race now that the cosmic race.
Oh yeah,
which is taking over everywhere from California all the way to Texas.
yeah.
That, by the way, that's a lot of people don't realize that there's been for over 100 years there has been a Mexican supremacist movement. I mean, people know about La Raza. Like, oh, well, isn't that bad? They refer to themselves as the race.
New Mexican Empire.
But the La Raza is actually short for La Raza Cosmica, the cosmic race, which is the superior bronze race, which combines the best of the white, the red, and the black. Which, I mean, and this has been an ideology has been around for over 100 years.
I heard that before somewhere, but near to me. But yeah, it's with more mustache or less mustache. In fact, less mustache than the typical Mexican. But yeah, it's we live amazing times. Again, we have to conclude that this is, you and me are not the kind of guys who wish for, if we could only go back to the 50s America or the 60s France or Switzerland. No, this is going to be super exciting, this chaos and this movement, because we are seeing history with a big H happening.
Yeah, they say that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And we're definitely heading into the times that the historians write about.
Well, I don't know if it rhymes, but it could very well dance the cucaracha or some Cossack dance. But yeah, it is amazing.
Yeah, I think that we're both cursed and blessed to live in times like these because, on the one hand, it can be difficult, it can be dangerous, and a lot of people are going to suffer. A lot of people are already suffering.
Yes.
I mean, what's happening in and to the Ukrainian people is awful.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not even talking about what the Russians are doing. And so, but it's also a blessing in that these times are when the great advances happens. Renaissance Italy was a dangerous and violent place, but there's a reason why it also has some of the greatest explosion of art and painting and architecture and that the world has ever seen. And God knows, after the last 80 years of uniform mediocrity I mean seriously, if you look at, you're a publisher, I'm a publisher, if you look at the great books of the 20th century, there's Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien. Maybe a book or two by F. Scott Fitzgerald might fit in as a minor work that's worth citing, but
C.S. Lewis has good ones.
C.S. Lewis is good, but it's not it doesn't.
They're not epic the way
you wouldn't compare it to the Decameron, and
no.
And if you just look at the media and the art is just, and the architecture is just a parody of everything about the last 80 years has been against the good, the beautiful, and the true, which is not only a Christian virtue, but is actually a pagan virtue as well, going back to Aristotle. And so, I don't think that we're going to miss much from that ugly, false, and evil world that we are hopefully on the verge of coming out of.
I was thinking that Italian Renaissance was also great because of all this diversity. Because indeed, a guy from Pisa is not a guy from Florence, is not a guy from Milano, is not a guy from the French invaders at the time. But then again, if you probably make a series on Netflix on the Renaissance, they would all be African anyway.
Especially if Mary Beard had anything to do with it.
Yes, the youngest generation. How do we leave good kids for these chaotic times? I mean, and by good I mean kids able to do the good, the beautiful, and the true.
We have to teach them well. We have to model good behavior for them. And most important of all, we have to be courageous. We have to show them that we are unafraid to say what is true. We have to be unafraid to stand up for what is right, even if it makes us hypocritical. Whether we are successful or not in attempting to be virtuous, we still seek it. We still pursue it. It's still the ideal. We attempt to do things that are beautiful rather than ugly. I mean, I've been guilty. If you look at the music that I was involved in my 20s, there wasn't much that was beautiful about it. But you can pursue it. It's never too late to make a decision to do the right thing, or at least it's never too late to make a decision to try to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And we need to do the opposite of what our boomer parents did. And instead of telling the girls, oh, come finish your education first, don't get married in your 20s, you're too young, don't get hung up on credentials and education. Focus on building your life, focus on finding a mate, focus on building a family. To me, it's very encouraging that we're seeing more good people doing things like homeschooling, doing things like getting married younger, having children younger. These are all good things.
Yes. And
so, especially in the aftermath of the vaccination debacle, the COVID vaccination debacle, and it's they say that the future belongs to those who show up for it.
Yes.
And those of us who have children, and those of us whose children prioritize building new families and having families, the future is going to belong to us. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's a very positive, optimistic thought, because if you look at the ramifications of Clown World, it's not just evil. It's not just stupid. It's sterile.
Sterile and death, and the death cult.
Yeah, they're literally, like, when they're encouraging this evil trans nonsense, they're literally sterilizing every single person they win over. Every single, so our armies grow. Our armies are fertile. Mm-hmm. Theirs are sterile. They might as well be the Cauldron Born from Lloyd Alexander.
Now, as you know, I'm not exactly a super believer, but it seems to me that this Clown World is harvesting souls.
Well, it is, because Clown World is ultimately satanic. Mm. And, a lot of people like to, they blame the Freemasons, they blame the Illuminati, they blame the Jews, etc., etc. And they're all, to some extent, correct. And they're all, to some extent, missing the point. Because at the end of the day, Ephesians 6:12 is correct. The battle is not a material one. The battle is a spiritual one. And the fallen world, the fallen spiritual world, is becoming ever more apparent, even to people who don't even believe in anything beyond the material world. Because, at a certain point, when Disney is sacrificing billions of dollars in order to destroy the intellectual property it owns, you can't really pretend it's about money, can you?
Yeah. Or when BlackRock is financing on the condition that companies they invest into push a woke agenda, to make it short,
Yeah.
hence bringing chaos, loss of productivity, loss of profitability. It's got to be something else than the money.
It's not money, it's not material, it's not greed. It is in service to evil. And if you look at history, the signs of that have always been there. I mean, I think we mentioned this at some point in time in one of our previous conversations, but why were the Romans, who are not a Christian people, why were they so determined to eradicate Carthage? What was so awful that they not only had to destroy it completely, but sow it with salt and wipe out every trace? What was it about the Aztecs that not only caused the Spaniards, remember the conquistadors, there were like 120 of them. Why were the rest of the tribes in that area so determined to completely destroy the Aztec Empire of the Mexica?
Human sacrifice.
Yeah, and it always comes, I mean, they're always after the kids.
Yes.
And they're always trying to destroy.
Yes.
And,
Yeah, there was lots of children sacrificed with the Aztecs and the Carthaginians.
Right.
Of course, Baal.
And so, I'm a Christian myself, but I encourage every pagan, agnostic, atheist, non-believer, whatever it is you believe or don't believe, look at what the options are. And, if you do one thing, it's stand against that evil, because I don't, that the evil not only hates the good, but it even hates its own servitors. There's a great scene in Susan Cooper's book, The Dark is Rising. And there's a character named Hawkins who's a human servant of the light. And he gets seduced by the dark and he betrays the light. But when his utility to the dark is done, the Black Rider throws him down from his horse and he breaks his back and he's lying there dying. And it's such a wonderful metaphor for what that spiritual evil thinks of its servants and how it treats them.
It reminds me of the Mephistopheles in Goethe's Faust. Yes, you never win making a deal with the devil.
No.
Whether it's real or metaphorical, it doesn't matter.
I mean, look at Madonna. She's a very bright woman, but she has very little talent. And so I don't know what deal she made or what ticket she took, but wow, is she paying for it now?
I've not even seen her.
She's literally looks like a monster. Just like an inhuman monster with balloon inflated flesh, and it's a parody of a human being.
Yeah, it's hard to grow old when you don't want to. It catches on you. Yeah.
So
it's a material world, and we're material girls, or we identify as material girls. Not really. Anyway, I thank you very much. Again, we should do these with talks regularly, and we will. And I believe we're setting up a studio here in this office. It's going to be really neat. And it is 25th of June 2023. Any last words for the summer, for the people who are going to prepare in the summer?
I would just say it's a good time to keep adding to your preparations and adding to your stores of knowledge but don't despair.
Oh no. Or I'm gonna just a second. You know, in my forthcoming book, I have a chapter on despair. And I kind of write a debate, and I interviewed a few people. Like I interviewed you for one of the chapters of the book, of course. And Kierkegaard, very smart philosopher of the 19th century, or beginning of 19th century, middle of the 19th century, basically said at some point that you have to despair to make sure that you get rid of all the illusions so that you can hope again. It's a very interesting, of course it's 19th century, you know, the religion was attacked by science, and science was not yet able to explain what it can explain today. And there was a bizarre moment in time there before Nietzsche started to put everything straight. but it is despair is a very today, for example, we live in a world where you have to show you have to be a victim to be considered in society. It's who doesn't feel good in his with his gender or race or whatever. And we all have moments of doubt and despair in life, but I agree with you. You have to bounce back and be I don't know if optimist is the right word, right?
I don't think optimist is the right word, but I think that it's important to remember that hope is a virtue. Mm-hmm. I mean, when it talks about the great gifts, it's faith, hope, and love. Love being the greatest, but hope being up there with faith. Mm. And, you know, a lot of people are afraid to hope. They're like, oh, well, you know, if you're giving false hope or whatever, but false hope is better than no hope. False hope is better than despair.
Yeah, and in fact, chaos or whatever is going to happen is better than the world that these clown guys are preparing for us. 100%. So I'm super happy, in a way.
Concerned, but happy.
But happy. Excellent. Vox Day, we'll speak again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ciao.